Within 4 months, every physician in the city of Avignon was dead. The replacements lasted 3 weeks. The replacements after them lasted 12 days. In the year 1348, the Black Death reached its peak across Western Europe. By the end of that year, between 30 and 60% of the population of every infected city was dead. Plague doctors, the men who walked into the houses of the dying, held the single most dangerous job in the deadliest catastrophe in recorded human history. Their survival rate was a number nobody dared to calculate. This is what their work actually looked like. He woke at first light because there was no point in waking later. The city authorities had hired him at a fixed rate of 30 livres a month, 3 times what a normal physician earned, to do work that had killed every man who held the post before him. He had accepted the contract because he had nothing else. Most men who took the contract were either failed physicians who could not find paying patients, or young students who had not yet finished their training at the universities of Montpellier or Bologna. The trained physicians had refused the work, fled the cities, or were already dead. His robe was waxed canvas. The wax was supposed to repel miasma, the bad air that the church and the medical schools believed carried the disease. Modern microbiologists know that Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that causes plague, is carried by fleas living on rats, and that the most lethal form, pneumonic plague, spreads from person to person through coughed droplets. The plague doctor did not know any of this. His robe could not protect him from what he did not understand. The iconic beaked mask, the long-nosed leather helmet that modern viewers associate with plague doctors, would not be invented until 1656. 3 centuries later. The plague doctor of 1348 wore something simpler and more disturbing. A leather hood covered his head. Over his nose and mouth he tied a folded cloth packed with dried herbs, rosemary, lavender, juniper, sometimes garlic. The herbs were chosen because their smell could overpower the smell of the dying. Underneath the cloth, his face was uncovered. He carried a wooden stick. The stick was 6 feet long, made of ash or oak, with a leather grip at one end. He used it for 3 things. He used it to lift the bedclothes of the dead without touching them. He used it to push back the families of the dying when they tried to embrace him in gratitude or in despair. And he used it to point at the body, at the rats in the corner, at the marks on the skin that he had been instructed to look for. The first house on his round was on the Rue de la Banasterie, 2 streets from the papal palace. The address had been written on a slate hanging in the council hall the night before. Anyone whose family had begun to show symptoms was required by ordinance of Pope Clement VI to report it to the watch. The watch passed the addresses to the plague doctors at dawn. There were 6 plague doctors in Avignon that week. They had 400 houses to visit. The math was clear. He knocked with the stick. The wife answered. She was already crying. She had not slept. Her husband had taken to bed 3 days before, complaining of a headache. By the next morning, his armpits had begun to swell. By the morning after that, the swellings had reached the size of an egg. By yesterday, they had turned black. Today, she was about to lose her husband. By next week, by the doctor's professional estimate, she would also lose her 3 children, her father-in-law, and herself. He let himself into the bedroom. The room smelled of vinegar and human waste. The household had been burning vinegar in a small iron bowl since the symptoms began, because vinegar fumes were believed to clean the air. They did not. The man on the bed was conscious. The man on the bed was 41 years old. The man on the bed had been a wine merchant. He turned his eyes to the doctor without turning his head. The doctor checked for the marks. He did not need to touch the patient. He did not even need to look closely. The buboes, the swellings the disease was named for, were the size of small apples now, in the man's armpits and groin. They were dark purple, almost black. They had been the size of grapes 3 days earlier. The skin around them was beginning to die. There was nothing to do. The treatments of 1348 reflected a medical theory that was about to collapse. The reigning model of disease was inherited from the 2nd century Greek physician Galen. Galen taught that the body contained 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness came from an imbalance among them, and the cure was to drain the excess. Plague doctors of 1348 were trained to bleed their patients, lance the buboes, apply hot poultices of frog skin or pigeon entrails, and bury the patient up to the neck in dirt for 1 full day to draw out the poison. He carried a small lancet in a leather case. He used it to open the buboes when the family asked him to. The pus that came out was the color of milk mixed with blood. The patient screamed. The patient sometimes died on the spot from the shock. If the patient did not die immediately, the wound did not heal. Within hours, infection from the lancet wound made the death even faster than the plague would have. He did not lance this man's buboes. He prescribed the herbal infusion the council had standardized: rue, sage, and juniper berries boiled in vinegar, and told the wife to give it to the patient hourly. He marked the door with a chalk cross on his way out. The chalk cross meant the house was under quarantine. No one was to enter or leave for 12 days. The wife stood in the doorway and watched him walk down the street toward the next address. She died 7 days later. The plague that reached Avignon in early 1348 had traveled from Central Asia by a route that took less than a decade. It began in the steppes north of the Caspian Sea, possibly among marmot populations. By 1346, it had reached the Black Sea port of Kaffa, where it spread through a Mongol siege. From Kaffa, Genoese traders carried it on ships across the Mediterranean. By October 1347, infected ships had reached Messina in Sicily. By January 1348, the plague had reached the southern French port of Marseille. Avignon, 250 kilometers north of Marseille, was infected within weeks. The mortality rate of bubonic plague in 1348 was approximately 60% of those infected. The mortality rate of pneumonic plague, the form that spread by coughing rather than flea bite, was effectively 100%. A person infected in the morning would be dead by the next morning. Pneumonic plague did not require a flea or a rat. It only required a breath. The plague doctor did not know which form he was walking into when he opened a door. The bubonic form gave him a day or two to leave the room before he himself began to swell. The pneumonic form did not. He made 12 more visits that day. By the 7th visit, he had stopped removing his herb cloth between houses. By the 11th, his hands were shaking inside the leather gloves. He had not eaten since dawn. The herbs in his cloth had absorbed so much of what he had smelled that they had begun to smell like the dying. The houses began to repeat. A child of 7, dead in his mother's arms, in a bedroom that smelled of urine and lavender. An elderly woman, still alive, calling him by the name of her dead son. A merchant who had hanged himself in his attic the night before because his wife had begun to show the swellings and he could not bear to watch her die. The doctor pulled the man down from the ceiling beam with his stick and marked the door with the cross. He recorded each visit on a small wax tablet in his belt pouch. The Avignon authorities required a count of the dead from each doctor at the end of every day. The count from his tablet that day was 17. There were 6 doctors on rounds. The total count for Avignon that day, as reported by Pope Clement VI's secretary, was 400. Throughout the spring of 1348, the daily count in Avignon held steady at 400 dead. Bodies were buried in mass pits dug outside the walls. Within weeks, The pits had filled. The Pope consecrated the entire Rhone River so that bodies could be thrown directly into it for burial. Pope Clement VI was 66 years old in 1348. He had moved into the papal palace at Avignon 30 years earlier, when the papacy had relocated from Rome. When the plague reached the city, his physician, a man named Guy de Charliac, who would later write the standard surgical textbook of the late Middle Ages, gave him an unusual prescription. The Pope was to sit between two large fires. The fires were to burn continually, day and night, even at the height of summer. He was not to leave the room. He was not to admit visitors. The flames, Guy de Charliac believed, would burn away the miasma carried by the air. It worked. Pope Clement VI survived the plague. Guy de Charliac caught it himself and survived also. The Pope's physician was the rarest of the rare. Of the 6 plague doctors hired by the city of Avignon in early 1348, 5 were dead by the end of the year. He returned to the council hall at dusk to report his count. The wax tablet went into a wooden box on the table. The next day's addresses were already written on the slate. He took his copy. He walked back to the small room above the apothecary that the city had rented for him. The apothecary had died 2 weeks earlier. The shop downstairs was empty. The room above smelled of dried herbs and his own sweat. He ate bread and watered wine and lay down in the dark. The bed had been bought from the family of the previous occupant, the previous plague doctor of his district, who had survived 4 months in the post before he himself died. The mattress had been boiled in vinegar before he received it. He slept badly. He woke twice in the night with a fever and convinced himself he was infected. Both times the fever broke before morning. He slept again. He did not know that he had 3 more months in this post before his own death. He did not know that the Black Death would kill an estimated 1/3 of the entire population of Europe by 1351, that it would return in waves for the next 300 years, that the iconic beaked mask would not be invented until long after the medieval world he lived in had ended. He only knew that the next morning he would walk back to the council hall, collect a new slate of addresses, and begin again. By the autumn of 1351, the first wave of the Black Death had passed. The population of Avignon had fallen by approximately half. The population of Florence had fallen by 60%. The population of the village of Ayam in northern England, which would later be made famous for voluntarily quarantining itself when the plague returned in 1665, had fallen by 75% in 14 months. The plague doctors of 1348 left almost no records of themselves. The contracts they signed with city councils survive in some archives. A handful of letters survive. We have one tract written by Guy de Charliac, the Pope's physician, who admitted that during the plague he was in continual fear of death and that he had no idea why his treatment sometimes worked and usually failed. Of the men hired by city councils across France, Italy, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire, most are not named in any document. They appear in the archives as a job title and a salary, paid out month by month until the salary was reassigned to a new name. Then that name disappeared. Then another. In the spring of 1348, in the city of Avignon, 6 plague doctors were hired by the council. By the end of the year, 5 had been replaced. By the end of 1349, the originals were all gone, and so were most of the replacements. The post continued. The slate was always written each dawn. The doors were marked, the houses sealed, the dead were counted, and the next morning the dawn brought new addresses, and there was always someone, almost always young, almost always desperate, who needed 30 livres a month, enough to put on the waxed canvas robe and walk into the houses of the dying. Their names are gone, the wages are recorded. The bodies they walked past were buried in pits or thrown into the river. Their own bodies, when they fell, were treated the same way as any other plague death, sealed in the house where they died, burned in the bed where they slept, dragged to the same pit they had been pointing to with a wooden stick the week before. They had been given 30 livres a month to walk into the houses of the dying. They had taken the job because they had nothing else. The disease did not care what they wore. The Pope sat between his fires and lived. The plague doctors walked from house to house, marked the doors, counted the dead, and were forgotten. The names that remained were the names of the Pope and the saint and the merchant who hanged himself in his attic. The names of the doctors who walked into every house in Avignon in the spring of 1348 are not in any chronicle. Within 4 months of the plague's arrival, every physician in the city had been replaced once. Within 6 months, they had been replaced again. The math was clear from the first week. Nobody asked the question out loud. The answer was always the same. The work continued. The dead were buried. The fires burned. The Pope survived. The forgotten did not.